Okay, I'm gonna come over your way.
We have the attendance sheet.
Oh, thank you. I should give you 10% credit just for reminding me of that, right? There you go. Okay, let's see. What you can share, I appreciate. I actually can kind of make this kind of better. Ah. Yeah, it's all right. Yeah. Okay, so we're talking today about missions where? Asia. Wow. Okay. I don't know about you, but there's so much packed into this chapter on Asia, and it's almost overwhelming. I mean, the region is huge. And this book was written in '08. Okay, if I remember, let me just double check that. I think it was '08. Yeah. So, we're already 15 years beyond that, and things have changed. For instance, he does mention in the book that, I think he intimates that China is the largest country in the world, and now, in terms of population, India seems to have passed it up. But, okay, so what are your thoughts on the Great Commission in China? What did you mark down?
Later on in the chapter, there's an interesting story about one guy's last name starts with an M.
Mm-hmm.
No, Wang.
Wang, yeah. What about the story?
His dad committed suicide during the Boxer Rebellion.
Yeah. Why did he commit suicide?
He didn't want to see them killing his wife and his daughter.
Yeah, he just assumed they were going to be killed, and
then he left his only son.
Yeah.
To take care of him, I'm sure.
Yeah.
I thought it was interesting how he talked about like how it's suspected that when the church first began, that it was established pretty quickly in Asia, and then things have like gone away, and how things are like shifting back, and now just like how he was talking about how South Korea is like second in sending out missionaries. I thought that was really interesting.
Yeah. What do you remember about our study of South Korea? Remember we touched on missions there a little bit. How does that relate to what we studied about South Korea? Do you remember anything about the receptivity of the people of Korea to the gospel?
They were more receptive than the people in Japan.
Right. Japanese are much more suspicious, cautious, conservative. The people of Korea seem to be more open, not just in terms of gospel, but even in terms of like Western technology and ideology. Do you remember that in Korea, there was not one dominating religion like Buddhism or Shinto that you find in Japan? And that also made it easier for them to be more open to the gospel. Yeah. Good. What else?
I think it was interesting about Korea too that that countries around them like recognize that there are a lot of like missionaries coming from Korea, and so they like are like quietly moved to block Koreans from entering their countries. So they like see that Koreans come into their country and are missionaries. I don't know, I never thought of that. I thought that's like they don't allow like Western countries to come or something, but it's like right in their continent, like they don't want Koreans in their country because they know there are a lot of missionaries coming.
Yes, I actually underlined a comment about that. Let me see if I can, where are you at?
And page 158.
Hang on, let me see if I can find the quote that I wanted to make sure to share. Yeah, right in the middle of the page. Do you see there where it starts with, but it's unique. It's uniquely Koreans doing this with Korean structure, with Korean church support, with Korean zeal and Korean spirituality. So one of the hallmarks of Korea is that they seem to be depending less, cooperating less with Western partnership than maybe some other countries do.
I had a question about something on page 155.
Yeah,
Towards the bottom of the first paragraph, it says, for instance, with the growth of indigenous churches, missions-related churches have been forced to speed the process of contextualization, and the perception that Christianity is a Western-related movement has, at least in some cases, abated. What does that mean?
okay, read that again, would you? Read that sentence again.
For instance, with the growth of indigenous churches, missions-related churches have been forced to speed the process of contextualization, and the perception that Christianity is a Western-related movement has, at least in some cases, abated.
Okay, so what are they trying to remove? What are these Korean churches trying to eliminate?
That Christianity is like a Western world thing.
Okay, all right. And so in order to do that, they're speeding up what? What's the big key word there?
Contextualization.
Okay, and what is contextualization?
Opposite of nationalization.
Well, yes, yeah. Well, no, wait a minute, not, maybe colonialism. Nationalization is a good thing, right? Nationalization is what? If I'm nationalizing a church, what am I doing?
Bringing in people in the nation to lead the church.
Yeah, I'm turning it over to them. That's actually assisting
Hudson
contextualization.
Taylor said that it's not the nationalization of the churches, but the was it contextualization?
Who said that?
I thought Hudson Taylor said it's not the nationalization, but the Christianization.
Yeah, but I think he was saying that in the context of trying to make it look like a certain, reflecting Christianity in a certain nation.
Mm.
And it's not a national identity, it's a Christian identity. I think that's where he was going with that. We use the word nationalization to refer to actually turning it over to the nationals. That contributes to contextualization. So what's going on here is that they wanted to work as quickly as possible in the Korean churches to eliminate all of the remnants of, a Western style of church so that people would not associate Christianity with Western culture. How do you do that? Well, he doesn't say in here, does he, how they went about that? I don't remember any.
What about their church would be different from our churches?
Okay, good question. Let me just make an inserted comment here. The denomination that has really become most prominent among Korean evangelicals is, does anybody know which denomination is the strongest one there? It's not Baptists. It's not Lutherans.
Is it Protestant?
Well, okay, Protestant would be the larger category, but what group that came out of Protestantism?
The Pentecostals.
Well, there are Pentecostals, but the Presbyterian Church seems to be the one, and I don't have figures for that. That's just what I've read a couple of times. The Presbyterian Church, because two of the early missionaries there were Methodists and Presbyterians, but the Presbyterians grew more. We had a student here when I first came back in, like right around 2008, 2010, that he came and studied here, and his dad was a Presbyterian pastor from Korea. And, so obviously he didn't completely fit in with, our understanding of certain doctrines, but So how do you do that? Well, for one thing, you try as hard as you can to place nationals in positions of pastoral leadership as soon as possible. How are you going to do that? How are you going to make it possible for nationals, Koreans, to become pastors quickly rather than American missionaries being the pastors? How do you do that?
To provide their men with schooling.
Mm-hmm. And they did that. I don't remember where it was, but they mentioned in here that the Koreans worked hard to establish schools, training centers, so that they could get, nationals into the pulpits as soon as possible. Okay. Yeah, I don't recall where that is. So now, do you have to have schools to do that? No, you can train pastors in your church, right? They can bring them right up through the church. But the movement was growing so quickly that it would be difficult to do that. So they did establish schools to train nationals. Look, what do you do in a church service that looks Korean rather than not much? You're singing hymns, you're praying, you're scripture reading, somebody's preaching a message. You know what I mean? That's almost a universal given. And why is that? Why is it that churches all over the world practice those same basic things? Where does that come from? It does, but who do we learn that from? We actually kind of adopted that practice from scripture reading, public prayer, a word, a message of some sort. Where did that start?
From synagogues?
Yes, synagogues. The synagogues weren't even mandated by God. They rose up sometime during probably the Babylonian captivity. But what a blessing they became in that sense, because the synagogue leaders recognized the main components that needed to be part of a gathering of people to study the word and worship Jehovah. And even though synagogues, took a wrong turn in a lot of their beliefs and stuff, look, they threw people out of the synagogues, they tried to stone Christ or throw him off a cliff. But those elements have remained universally in the Church of Jesus Christ. So the differences, Ella, I think are more in style. They really are. I was talking to somebody recently about the African church. It's really hard to go to an African church without doing the shuffle. You know what I mean? So dancing, the two-step, we call it. It's just, they got to move, because for them, bodily movement and worship are inseparable. You just do it. Now, we look at that here, we say, oh, that's sensual, that's worldly, that's dancing, or whatever. But there's a book that I actually want to read if I ever get time. It's a book written, it's kind of a scientific study on the influence of bodily movements in music. And I want to read that. It's written by a Christian. I want to read it sometime. So it's really more style than it is, anything else.
I actually went to an Asian church last night.
Oh, you did? Where at?
In Des Moines.
Okay.
Her name, Hannah, is from Myanmar.
Yeah, okay. Is it a Chin? They do it in the Chin language? You remember, what language does she speak? Do you happen to remember?
I think it's Chin. Well,
There's several.
she's Hakka,
Yeah.
but she
That's Chin.
understands like Burmese and all these other ones. So I don't know.
Good.
I didn't understand anything they were saying the whole time, but it seemed pretty similar to our church.
Sure. Think about how those basic elements that we just named, you really have to have those to fully engage in worship and instruction with the people of God. Yeah. Yeah, there's Chin Halak, there's Chin Mizo, there's Chin this and Chin that. We got 4 or 5 of those on our campus.
But I think their church is called it's like Chin Baptist Church or something like that.
Okay.
But Chin is in the name.
Yeah, okay. Yeah.
So,
Chin is the people group, and within that there are different variations. And some of them can't even understand each other. They're different enough.
mhm.
But Chin is kind of the ethnic designation. Yeah. Cool. All right, what else am I reading? This is good.
One thing I thought was interesting on page 153,
Mhm.
but it crosses over to 154, you just how like the World Missionary Conference is like going on. And it just talks about how the planners of it didn't comprehend the already vibrant Christian activity outside of the West. Like they were just focused on things in the West.
Mhm.
And while the conference planners did invite a small number of Christian leaders, they weren't expecting the explosion of the indigenous Christian movement. It didn't seem to be on the radar. I don't know. So like the idea is just that it exploded and they didn't even think about it
Yeah.
or consider that.
It's like they weren't perceiving how Christianity was blossoming in Asia, and it was kind of a wake-up call in some ways to that. And where was that famous conference located? 1910 is the year. It's one of the most famous of all missionary conferences in the modern era. Edinburgh, okay,
What is that?
Scotland. And yeah, as a result of that, people began to wake up to the fact that, you know, there are significant groups and significant leadership, you know, in Asian, not just Asian, Africa was, you know, anywhere besides the West. What do we call that when what is shifting? When we talk about a certain kind of a shift, what is that shift that takes place when it comes to the focus of God's people in the world?
Like the center. Okay,
Yep,
center of
That's it, the
gravity.
center of gravity, yeah. And which ways is shifted toward most recently?
Toward the east.
It's moving back that way. They call it shifting to the south. They call it Southern Christianity. And that's not Alabama, remember? It's because it's a lot of it's south of the equator, although that's really kind of a misnomer because so much of it is happening north of the equator as well, but it's shifting. Probably, I would almost prefer to call it Eastern Christianity than Southern. But, you know, if you look at Africa, for example, north of the equator is mostly Islamic. And most of African evangelicalism is in the south of Africa, south of the equator. So anyway, yeah. So there's a huge shift in the center of gravity. What spawned that? What were we talking about here?
What?
What was your comment originally? I lost my train
Just
of
how
thought.
interesting it was how they were so focused on West and didn't even think about how
Yeah.
Christianity was growing outside of that.
Yeah. Okay. So yeah, can I just remind you guys again of something that is so important? Sometimes we really get discouraged because of what's happening in Europe and America with the church, right? We talk about it diminishing, and that is true. But on the other hand, as the light grows dimmer here, it's growing brighter, working its way back toward its starting point. And that's the way it's been throughout the last 2,000 years of church history. There's been a constant moving of the center of gravity. And so it's almost like Christianity in every part of the world experiences a dawning, a bright noonday, and then, the setting of the sun in that location. It just seems to be, I can't think of any geographic location in the world where Christianity became bright and stayed that way. Christ is doing something that, and I'm not saying we should excuse the darkening of Christianity in Europe and America. Okay, we still send missionaries and we still work it, but it's just a part of the reality of what Christ is doing as the gospel makes its way around the world. The center of gravity is moving back toward its starting point. It's amazing. Do you remember the name of the movement that somebody mentioned here? There's a name of a certain movement that has to do with that tendency to go back toward its starting point. May I catch that? Back to, yeah, it's a movement. Yep, it's near the latter part of the book. It's called Back to Jerusalem. Okay, I don't know if you remember here. It's on page 158, last paragraph. The astonishing complexity of missions from Asia can be seen from the case of the now well-known Back to Jerusalem movement. Now, if it says well-known, you think, okay, I should know this. Right, I remember when I first heard about it, one of my colleagues said, "You're teaching missions and you haven't heard of this?" So he gave me a book to read about that. And so it's a slogan that dates back before the 1940s in China, when Christians dreamed of sending missions back along the ancient Silk Route to Jerusalem. So from China to Jerusalem. They believed that missions had encircled the world during the nearly 2,000 years since the time of Christ. And it was the responsibility of Chinese Christians to complete the task. So Chinese believers viewed themselves as kind of the last chapter in this. They're going to be the ones that take it right back to Jerusalem and complete the circle. You know, now, has that happened? Hard to tell. Fact of the matter is, we know you see these numbers here, we know really little about the actual numbers. Some of these numbers are probably, some of them probably are a little inflated. We look at page 155, that middle paragraph and the second sentence. Between 1900 and 1970, the number of Christians in Asia rose from just over 20 million to a remarkable 96 million. Where do they get their statistics? Is it really true that China and Chinese Christians kept that good of records and that somebody was there to tabulate and calculate all that to come up? They're all estimates. We just don't know. And I had a lady once that was lived in China and ministered in China tell us once that 90% of Chinese churches are made of women and 90% of the leaders are women leaders. So sometimes an image is cast of what's going on somewhere else that may not be entirely true. For instance, have you ever heard anybody say, do you know what believers in China pray for when they pray for America? Have you heard this one? They pray for persecution in America so that we can be strong like they are. And it gives you the impression that the Chinese Christians are the ones that are all strong and growing, and we're all weak. And sometimes these generalizations can be misleading and actually discouraging to people like you and me that don't live in those places. And you get there, and you hear people who live there saying, "Well, that's not exactly the way it is." People may observe that here or there, and then make a generalization that takes in everybody. And we do the same thing here. You say the church in America is, or the church in Europe is, and then we put everybody in that category. So we have to be really careful when we read these statistics and these tendencies that we don't overstate the case, because it's very easy to make generalizations. Okay, what else?
So, we talked about how a lot of these missionaries from South Korea are just in Christians in Asia in general, like stay in their own area or their own country and minister to those people because they need it. Do you think we have that same responsibility here? Like, there's a ton of need in the US and in our own areas, like even in Chapel today, like the huge need in Minneapolis.
Can you think of some mission agencies that are focusing on either revitalizing or planting churches in America? What agencies come to mind? Think of conference. Did you meet anybody from agencies that are trying to reach North Americans?
There's church planting ones.
Yeah, Baptist Church Planters is one of them, right? We had two missionaries, I think, come from there. Were you going to say one?
Does BMM have a church planting thing?
There is BMM North America. One of their fields is they have a little conference every year. They used to do it here. I don't know if they did it here last summer. Are you familiar with it?
Northwest too.
Northwest Baptist Home Missions, Continental Baptist Missions, ABWE. Most of those large agencies have a chapter of missionaries trying to reach people here. So yes, I think that it's happening. I mean, there was a time when people didn't really view home missions as, it wasn't exciting. I mean, they would admit that it's missions, but if you're not crossing boundaries and learning a new language and dealing with a different culture, then it wasn't, missions. But that's changing. That attitude is changing a lot. So yeah, I think that the Southern Baptists have a very big home mission group, and the International Foreign Missions group and the home missions group as well. So I think that there is a consciousness of both of those. both of our speakers at conference this year really have been involved a lot in home. Actually, Matt Recker, you wouldn't even necessarily call him a missionary. He is in a sense, but he's always been in New York. Steve Anderson spent years in Colorado before he went on board with Mid-Missions. You know,
Yeah, I just think a lot of times we overlook our need right where we're at.
yeah. Yeah, and it's easy to do that. But Ella, how do you know? I mean, the needs are so great on both ends of the equation. How do you know which one you should be a part of? How do you know that? How would you, let's just assume for sake of argument that you know that God wants you to be a missionary. Okay, now, how are you going to know whether God wants you to stay here and help fortify the cause here or go to Africa or someplace?
I want to say like my desire or burden for a location, but I know that it's not just all about like what we feel like, because no matter what I want to do or where I want to go,
Mhm.
I still have the duty to disciple others and right where I'm at.
Okay.
I don't know.
But when push comes to shove, how are you going to know which to do? What's God going to use to show you? Anybody?
Often it's like open or close doors. Like
Okay.
I think part of it is the desire, and then part of it is where God seems to lead you, whether you want to do that or not.
Okay.
He's like putting things in place.
Okay.
Sometimes there's two good options, and you just have to pursue them. And if God closes the door and doesn't work things out, consider if God wants you to do the other
Okay.
one.
And Laurel, I would just say that when you desire someplace, either God will fulfill that or he'll change your desire. Because I do think that God gives you a desire to do what he wants you to do when all the dust is settled. I always go back to Paul's experience on that second journey. He had to think this through, right? So he grabs Timothy at the beginning of Acts 16 and he says, I'm going to, where do you want to go?
Rome.
Pardon?
I thought he was going to Rome.
Well, eventually, but in the second journey, his intention after revisiting those Galatian churches is to go to Asia. That comes later, Spain. But immediately in the second journey, okay, remember he breaks up with Barnabas and he takes Silas, they pick up Timothy, and they're heading to Asia, and the Spirit of God says no. So Paul's using his head, right? He's thinking things through. But at the same time, he realizes that ultimately he's going to have to yield his rationale to God's will. And so he says, okay, well, he doesn't want us there, so okay, and he's thinking it through. Okay, let's go up to Bithynia. It's up in North Turkey. And so he's using his head again, right? He's thinking things through. He's trying to be responsible, and yet the Spirit says no again. So you give up and quit. Does Timothy say, "This guy doesn't know what he's doing"? No. I wondered if Timothy ever thought that, but there's no indication he did. And so God actually uses, in this case, a vision that he has, okay? So I think that's a really good illustration of the fact that we have to use our heads. We should do the math. We should think about, where people are needed, But at the same time, we recognize that our math isn't always equivalent to God's intentions. God, as we said a few days ago, God doesn't always, in fact, I don't think ever in church history has God equally proportioned to missionaries around the world, spread everybody out evenly. Nobody can hear twice, everybody's heard once. That's just not the way God has done it. So there's a combination. You be responsible, think things through, pray, talk to people, get information, but recognize that God may take you to some place that just doesn't seem to compute with the numbers that you've crunched. Yeah. That's why a close walk with God has gotta be your bedrock foundation. Real quick, what else? These are all good comments. Well, let me read something to you that I thought was interesting at the top Actually, start at the bottom of page 157. Last sentence, the number of missionaries from Korea is rocketing as the churches are sending out 1,100 new missionaries each year. Remember, this is written in '08. As many new missionaries annually as all the countries of the West combined. Again, who's keeping all these numbers? I don't know, but even if it's close, it's impressive. The terrific growth of the Korean missions movement is fairly new, as the opportunity for South Koreans to venture out in missions can be traced back to the 1988 Seoul Olympic Games. I don't think any of you were, I'll see, have I been born back then? No. Okay, that was sorry. That was the year before we left for Brazil's missionaries. And these games helped force the country to open politically. The point that I want to make is that politics in the world do have a place, do have an impact on missionary work. Okay, and God can use something as random, if I can say that, not random to God, as the 1988 Olympics in Seoul, Korea, to open Korea more politically to the world and at the same time facilitate missionary activity in Korea. It's amazing. And so we believe in the sovereignty of God in the political world, right? And God has used politics as a way to open up. Look in the book of Acts. How many times does Paul have contact with political people that make a difference in what happens in that location? It says today, almost 13,000 Korean missionaries are serving long-term around the world. With the 2008 Olympics scheduled for Beijing, which did happen in Beijing, many Christians hope, now remember this back in '08, many Christians hope to bring the gospel into China, but many Chinese Christians hope for increased political relaxation so they may bring the gospel to the world. Did that happen as the result of the '08 Olympics in Beijing? Not that I'm aware. So here's a case where God used the '88 Olympics in Seoul, Korea, to make a difference in the openness of Korea politically and to the gospel. But when it came to the Beijing Games in '08, maybe not so much. Just saying that God maneuvers things according to his intentions, not always according to our expectations. What else? I got time for another one.
Near the end of the chapter, it's talking about a guy who has my last name. And he's a filmmaker, and then he was converted to Christianity. And one thing I thought was interesting, the quote in the book says that because Chinese people can't gather in large Christian gatherings, perhaps using media is going to be a really great asset to people converting them to Christianity.
Yeah.
Do you think that's still true? I don't know when the book was written.
Yeah, written in '08, it's 15 years ago. I mean, one of the blessings of COVID was how it opened up avenues through Zoom and, Skype. Skype was the old one. COVID really brought Zoom to the forefront. Yeah, oh, absolutely. And even with the censoring that goes on, the Chinese government, like, help me out. What's the name of the social media platform?
TikTok?
No, not that. No, it's like Messenger or come on, the China one that everybody uses.
WeChat.
WeChat. I've heard that WeChat is highly, people are moving away from it because it's censored, more. It's not as encrypted, but still, people are still getting the gospel, and there's no way that the government is able really to keep tabs on all the incoming, data from the outside world. So yeah, I do think that God has really used that. I talked to a guy that was very interested in missions in China. One of the problems that he said, when Chinese people are hungry to learn more, they'll go on the internet and they'll look for stuff. And what are they finding on the internet more than anything else when they go to evangelical sites? It's the charismatics, it's the Pentecostals. There's a lot of that out there. And they really like that because it looks vibrant, it looks alive, it's enthusiastic. And a lot of them the majority of Chinese believers don't have a solid foundation in theology. So when they go online, it happens to even us here who have a better foundation. How easily are we taken in by an attractive looking podcast or something like that. But he said that's happening more than we'd like to think in China. They're hungry and they're finding sites that are really cool and they're latching onto them and they're taking in some cases some dangerous doctrines.
Mhm.
And we just pause here at the end. We say, somehow in the midst of all of this, Christ is getting his job done. And that's the one thing I want to leave with you more than anything else. It's easy to get discouraged when you start analyzing and all this. But if you just always keep in the backdrop of your mind, Christ is building his church. The gates of hell are not prevailing. And if I'm submitted to him, I get to be a part of this. Nobody wants to be part of a sinking ship. And we're not. If we're serving the Lord, then God is going to use us for something that is victorious and something that's going to bring honor to him. Hey, thanks, guys. Appreciate it. You're doing a great job with the discussion time. See you on Monday.